So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the panel discussion on the film Race to Save the World. We are thrilled, actually, to welcome such distinguished panelists and attendees. I'm Vijaya Jammalamadaka, president of our local League of Women Voters. I will do a brief introduction, and then I'll turn it over to our moderator for this evening, Sigrid Wright. Before we start, I would like to respectfully acknowledge that the land that we're on is the unceded territory of the Chumash people of Santa Barbara. We pay our respects to the Chumash elders past, present, and future who call this place their home. May we follow in your tradition of coming together and growing as a community. We thank the Chumash community for their stewardship and welcome their wisdom as we seek a healing path for all people and the earth. Now, a little bit about the League of Women Voters. The League is a 101-year-old organization, and we work at the national, state, and local levels on issues of concern to our communities. Our local league is an all-volunteer nonprofit, and our membership is open to anyone over 16 years of age. The league believes in the power of women to create a more perfect democracy, a democracy where every person has the right, the desire, the knowledge, and the confidence to participate. So one announcement on an upcoming event for the League. Next Thursday on September 30th at 6 p.m. we will live stream a virtual candidate forum for mayoral candidates, for the candidates who are running for the mayor of the city of Santa Barbara. Last Wednesday, we held a candidate forum for city council candidates from districts 4 and 6. And both these videos will be posted on our website in English and Spanish. Now about the film. We first heard about this extraordinarily moving and inspiring documentary by Joe Gantz from Gail Osherenko, who is a very active board member in our local league and who is an award-winning filmmaker herself. Gail emphasized to us that this is not a film about science and the politics of climate change. It's about people. And as Gandhi and other leaders have shown us, we need a tipping point number of such people to inspire us all to pay attention, to get all of us to understand the urgency of the climate crisis, and to inspire our lawmakers to pass laws to implement solutions. So this is a really important documentary, and I look forward to our panel discussion. And now I'd like to introduce Sigrid Wright, CEO of the Community Environmental Council, who will be our moderator tonight. Sigrid.
Beautiful. Thank you, Vijaya. Well, as you just heard, welcome to the Community Environmental Council and the League of Women Voters panel on the film Race to Save the World. This webinar is being recorded, so you will receive a link to the recording and other resources after the event. Please add your name, your location, and your affiliation, if any, in the chat so we can just meet you, the audience, and connect with one another. And then this is an active session and your engagement is welcome. We invite you to add questions in the Q&A during the discussion, and we will answer them as we're able during the discussion and at the Q&A at the end. And I apologize in advance if we're not able to respond to every question. It would be a sign of a good dialogue. So please use the chat for any other comments you may have or resources you want to share. We have a support team here to help us, including Iris, who you will see as one of the panelists, and Sarah, who is monitoring the chat and the Q&A. For those of you who don't know the Community Environmental Council, we are a 50-year-old organization based in Santa Barbara, serving Santa Barbara, Ventura, and San Luis Obispo counties. We just completed a 5-year strategic plan, and we are implementing it this year with a foundational framework built around climate policy, justice, resilience, and climate leadership. Our climate leadership program is creating events like this that build a base of climate knowledge, and we hope it inspires you to take action. Before we begin our discussion, I'd like to share the trailer for A Race to Save the World. If you've already seen the film, this will be a quick reminder of the powerful stories it tells. If you haven't yet seen the film, we hope it will inspire you to watch it. So Iris, if you could please roll the trailer.
These are ordinary people that haven't been arrested before. None of us had been arrested before. I did then end up saying to my husband and my daughter that I might be in jail. For a mother to go to jail, that is what it's going to take to make a difference.
I got to shut off 590,000 barrels of tar sands filled with toxic chemicals. I knew that when I cut that chain and I opened that fence, that I was crossing a threshold that I couldn't uncross. I had made a choice to go into another part of my life and that I wasn't going to be able to step back from that.
There's enormous pressure on us because we cannot lose this case.
I have one last stab at this, and I am gonna try and take it with all my might.
Got to go! Hey, hey! Ho, ho! Got to go! Hey, hey! Ho, ho!
There's this moment when you have to step out of this threshold of your own comfort and take a risk.
They bring this beast, this monster, into the beautiful Salish Sea, and we get to fight him with kayaks.
And all of a sudden, we had this incredible battle where we were winning because we were winning the moral fight. The whole world was cheering for us. Once you join the battle, you're in the battle. You know, then you're in.
Thank you, Iris. You can turn that off now. I'm really inspired and happy to have an opportunity now to speak to the director of that film, Joe Gantz, and one of the participants in the film, one of the kayaktivists whose voice you just heard about fighting facing a giant monster with kayaks, Bill Moyer, not to be confused with Bill Moyers. Bill Moyer, thank you, welcome. Let's start the conversation with the two of you. So much that's moving about this film, and I picked up on a number of themes, including the desire to really engage in the moral fight. I'm going to start with you, Joe, and just talk to me a little bit about what motivated you to make the film and about that theme.
Well, I've been making documentary films for about 30 years, and I've been following the documentary films on climate change. And when Al Gore made his film many years ago, I think the vast majority of people really didn't know what climate change was and how we could confront it. And it was a very important film. And as the years went on, the films were telling people over and over how bad things are and how much worse they're going to get. And I think at a certain point, that information was somewhat in the ether. And these films ended up being so overwhelming and depressing that it was hard for people to continue to wrap their mind around it, even though they were super well done and 100% true. I felt that it would be good if we could do a film that would kind of energize and inspire people by following people like Bill and Abby and Aji, who are in the trenches, doing whatever they can, just regular people who, unlike the rest of us, are not able to tune this out. People, have a sense of what's going on, have a sense of, how bad it could be in the very near future. But for various reasons, they feel like they need to go about their lives and raise their families and do well at their jobs. And there are some people who just feel compelled to get in the streets and to get involved and do whatever they can, because this is a situation that can't be ignored.
Yeah, absolutely. Bill, there's a moment where you are sitting on the couch with your teenage daughter, and there's so much that's really just really poignant throughout the film, and with all of the participants and the personal impact on their lives, and we might unpack some of that in a moment. But in this particular moment, you're sitting there and you say to her, "Change is inevitable, but are we going to be the authors of it or the victims of it?" Is that kind of a central theme for you, and that what drove you into this work?
Wow, that's really insightful of you to catch that. I'm a musician, and one of the things that early on, when I switched back to really focusing on activism, that I thought about was, when you're performing music, you practice, but then when you're on stage, you don't worry about whether you're smart enough or did it enough, or how you're going to impress people one way or the other. You just try to be authentically present to the music. And I feel like so many of us are in this culture constrained by this idea that we have to be experts or something like that, that we don't have the qualifications, that we aren't somehow qualified. But so this idea, I think, of being an author of our reality is fundamental for me. It's the idea of being up on stage or being in life, on the stage of life, and just attempting to be as much listening to the music of it all and responding with authenticity as I possibly can. So thank you for that question.
So that is probably naturally very uncomfortable. That was one of the things that I noted throughout the film, Joe, that as you said, you were talking about with everyday people who could not tune out what many of us or many folks are able to tune out. But it put them in some cases in a really uncomfortable and sometimes untenable positions. And they were, it's here we all are having this conversation together safely from our living rooms or wherever we are. But, you had participants who were learning or putting their lives in a situation where they could very well spend years in jail and or facing other types of discomfort. Could you speak to some of that? There were characters, for example, even if it was just the public speaking, you had a couple characters who had to really stretch themselves out of their comfort zone. And what was your observation of their growth?
Well, I spent 6 years making this film. And in the beginning, I was following people who were journalists and professors and scientists. And as time went on, I really wanted people who were just putting themselves on the line and putting themselves out there. I think that everyone who watches this film, I'm hoping, will be motivated to get in the street and make their voice heard for a livable future. But everyone doesn't need to take the same level of risks. I do think that we all need to show how important this is, and we need to, hold the politicians' feet to the fire. And I think that people like Bill and Michael and Abby and others in the film who are taking more risks will inspire people to just get involved and do whatever we can. And so I'm appreciative of the subjects I was able to find and each of their stories.
Thank you. Bill, how about you? I'm sure you've had to step out of your comfort zone many times. You know, what's been the impact on your personal life with that?
Well, I think that's a challenge because this isn't a one-off ideally, you know, that we're not just all of a sudden going to be an activist and we burn ourselves out, et cetera. For me, that's not the ideal, right? And I think I'm, you know, I honor all the work of all the other participants in the film. And for me, this is also my job. So I think that that's a level of privilege that I don't think that I wouldn't assume for everybody. But part of that experience has shown me that even, and especially from my own experience, that rebellion or liberty or living in your truth is kind of a muscle that you exercise. And as it becomes stronger, you are able to lean into new opportunities for action. The other piece is that these strictures and the things that we fail to do are not usually, for the most part, because they're illegal. It's just because we haven't imagined them, or we haven't imagined doing them with our friends yet. So I believe that we, and a lot of Backbone Campaign's work is on the realm of leveraging the realm of what is highly visible, but also safe and legal. So, you know, at an overpass with a giant banner, or on kayaks in the water, or shining lights on buildings. These, as one friend says, sometimes when you think that it's a wall, that you're walking into a wall, you get close enough and it's a curtain. And so, you know, walking into the next layer of your comfort and not forcing others to go beyond what they're ready for, but supporting them in that journey in a sustainable way.
But on a human level, Bill, you know, one of the risks you took was not just getting arrested. It was dealing with your family and their expectations of you to not just be an activist, but to be a husband and a father. And I think you could talk about that delicate balance, how to keep it all organized, because on a human level, for people like yourselves that are just doing anything and everything you can to try to turn this around, it's hard to juggle all that. And I think the film addresses that, and you can address that.
Yeah, well, that's of course true. And I haven't always walked that path with great balance or grace. So I feel that over the last 18 years, I've had to learn more how to do that. And I'm also a different person at 55 than I was at, 35. So, or 20 or 18. So,
thank goodness, by the way, but thank goodness, right?
Yeah, right. I'm happy about that. Like a little less drama. And social movement engagement is not easy. Let's not pretend like it is. It can be, can be a lot of toxicity. There's a lot of pain out there, and a lot of learning that we all have to do, around decolonizing our own minds and hearts and lives. But to me, I had to find ways, like I mentioned in the film, like gets mentioned, Joe captured in the film, is this pledge I made to my daughter that I would be making her breakfast every morning, so it doesn't save everything, but at least it starts the day with, you're important to me. And honestly, it's a journey, I think, for people to find the balance, to not do all-nighters for years on end. I think we have to find that relationship with the land and with the people and community and with ourselves that allows us to fight the long fight.
Yeah, I feel like that theme really does emerge from you and from everyone else, from others, that both the sincerity and severity the situation, but there's this joyfulness in the action. Some of it is, but by design, by bringing in activist art or chanting. Some of it is the joyfulness that just emerges, as well as the fatigue, but of walking 3,000 miles over 8 months, as some folks in the movie do on a giant climate march to Washington, D.C. But from that, in fact, there was a character, there was a participant who said that she wasn't sure what actually changed within that march, but certainly she had changed. And so that's kind of, I feel like there was a nugget there just in terms of our own personal growth. You both have been speaking to that.
Yeah, I would like to say that that love wins, and the reason that I don't even necessarily, I didn't used to think of myself as a climate activist, because for me it's a paradigm battle. It's a paradigm about a world where nothing of actual importance is for sale, versus a paradigm where everything and everybody's got a price on it. So I want to live in that other paradigm. So that's and if we don't address that paradigm, we're not probably going to address capitalism. We're not going to address capitalism. We're not going to address climate change.
Mm-hmm. Well, that feels like a great moment to bring in the rest of our panel, which includes some local activists, because this is a very active local conversation. I'm sure it is throughout the country. Mercifully, now we're having a lot more conversation about really what systemic change is going to take. Iris, if we could please bring, or if everyone could enter yourselves, David, Michael, Alyssa, please. I'll give you some introduction here. I am thrilled to have this really intergenerational conversation today. We're going to be talking with Alyssa Nazari Jain, who is a UCSB student activist. She's involved with the Sunrise Movement. Most of you should be familiar with that. She's a third-year environmental studies student, and she's been with Sunrise for about a year, which most of that's been during the pandemic. She recently marched to Banks about the Line 3 pipeline and fossil fuel investments. And she can talk about some of her other work here in this area. We also have on the panel Dr. David Pellow, who's a UCSB professor and a mentor to students like Alyssa, and a member of CEC's board. And David and I both serve on the Central Coast Climate Justice Network. And then Michal Lynch, who's a member of the Fearless Grandmother Society, which I had continued to say is the best name of all time for any organization. She was an organizer of the Women's March in 2017 and has been involved with Fearless Grandmothers marches, rallies, and so forth. And she's going to give us some tips on what we can get out and do. But before we get into those actions, I just want to see, is there anyone have any reflections on the conversation that we've had so far? I've got some questions for you, but I want to give you an opportunity to bounce off of that discussion around personal sacrifice and that kind of balance that's necessary to do this work. David, you're nodding, and I know you, so go.
Sure. Well, first of all, again, I want to say, congratulations to Joe on an amazing film, and Bill, the actions that you were taking in the film and your reflection on those actions individually, but also with your family. It was truly, truly moving. And so to that point, you just spoke to that about, making breakfast for your daughter. It was just amazing, right? Seeing the emotional toll that not just the activism, but what you're up against and the realization of what you're up against really is taking on you and your family and the other participants, activists, leaders in the film. I mean, seeing Abby and her husband, when her husband says, I don't give a damn about this court case, right? But I do love you, and that's what counts. But to see your daughter, just look you in the eye and just say, I love what you do. Maybe I don't know what you do, but I love you, Dad, and I support you. I mean, that just, that brought tears to my eyes. And I just think that this film does such a great job of centering those emotions, that toll, but also the joy of that activism, and how you are part of a web of a community that always involves your families. And so thank you for the work you're doing as an agent of social change, and thanks, Joe, for this amazing film, and for centering that toll and how people process and work through that.
Yes, we might come back to that too, but Michael, what's on your mind?
Well, Bill, I wanted to thank you for, in what you were saying, for mentioning how not everybody's going to do it the same way, and not everybody is going to jump in with as much commitment, but that doesn't mean that they shouldn't be jumping in.
Yeah.
Right. And Michael, I don't know, but have you been engaged in social change movements for some time?
Yeah.
Is this your first rodeo?
No, I started when I was in high school, but I was in New York, and it's a totally different world. There were so many more people participating, but what I noticed was there's also so many more people there. So the amount of impact wasn't as great. Whereas I'm in Santa Barbara. If we get 300 people, that's impressive. And when we got 1,000, that was outrageous. And then we got several thousand. That was just incredible. But it's even when just a few people show up at City Council here, we make a difference, because otherwise nobody shows up.
Yeah, that's right.
Bill, you said something earlier about activism being a muscle that you have to exercise, and as you do, it gets stronger. And it sounds like, Michael, that's been part of your kind of life history. Let's turn to Alyssa here. This is you're just at the beginning of starting to find and exercise those muscles. And what are you learning? What advice do you have for students who are your age?
Yeah, thanks. And I also want to echo what Michael and David were saying. Thank you guys so much, Bill and Joe. It was an incredible film, and your actions are really inspiring. And I do like what you said, Bill, about how you should be willing to take those risks and have courage to push forward, but don't necessarily drag anyone to do it against their will, or push them to do more than what they're comfortable with. And I think that has been a lot of my experience. I'm newer to the climate activism community, but they're all very supportive and encouraging you to have courage and to take a risk, but not necessarily forcing you to go too far. And I think I'm learning a lot that, like you said, is a muscle. Climate activism is also kind of addicting. Once you've done a little bit, you want to do more. So yeah, I've had a really great experience so far. And I think it is really important to be in that community and to have support and encouragement from people who've been there longer, like you all, and who are, passionate about the same thing. It's very inspiring.
Cool. I mean, I was an activist in high school, and then in college and campus. And it was the group of people that I met and that I did those things with were my community. So, and it really shaped my life and the direction that the journey that I went on. It sounds like Michael may have some similar experiences with that. And I also want to lift up what Michael was mentioned to some earlier. Is this like back when campaign, we used to just go after these giant issues like war and peace and stuff like that, But to me, it's the collusion between corporate and elected power that is that at the local level, where you can do a campaign that makes a material difference in people's lives and deliver a victory. And winning is important. Winning should not be underestimated. Winning is very important, and it's way more fun to win. And so getting the chops and the confidence from winning, trying to get into the New York Times or blah, 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 you can waste a whole lifetime trying to do that. And who cares? But when you start to bring your community along and deliver victories, you build confidence and capacity. And the same forces that are happening globally are impacting us locally. And that was honestly what was so cool about Shell bringing that Arctic drilling rig to the port of Seattle, is because all of a sudden this very hard to intangible fight around climate or even Arctic drilling became immediate, and we got to be on the water in the place that we love. And I just want to finish with this idea that a group of friends jamming on the question of, wouldn't it be cool if, or wouldn't it be funny if we, and you know, just jamming around that question is, I think, can tap into the magic and brilliance and genius and real power that we all have.
Great advice, great and a great perspective, Bill, and particularly I would think for Alyssa and that generation, but really for all of us. You know, this film, as I've said a couple of times, really gave us an opportunity to reflect on what we each individually stand for and what we're willing to sacrifice, and explored it through a dozen different stories, a dozen different lenses. And your philosophy there is, it's really inspiring. David, you know, backstage we were talking a little bit just about the themes, some of the other themes that come up here. And as I was saying, or as I was re-quoting Bill, that that activism, or actually I think he said rebellion, is a muscle that we have to learn to use. And he's speaking here about that collusion between corporate and elected power, which really is and has been kind of the centerpiece of what's been emerging as social justice and environmental justice groups start to work together. Do you want to speak to, you know, your observations in this area and any questions that, or any thoughts that you might have around that?
Sure. I mean, there's so much, and there's so much in this film. I barely know where to begin. Joe, you did such a great job of packing so much in there, and with such good clarity. You know, I was so moved by the message, at least as I received it, that, you know, this activism, and, you know, in Bill's case, that kayaktivism, Abby's case, and other cases, you know, we would call this, you know, blockadia, right? Putting your body on that line, right? And disrupting the mechanisms of power and ecocide and genocide. And each of the participants in this film really did that so well. And I think it came across that this was civil disobedience, that this was nonviolent, direct action, and that it was morally and ethically driven. And so for me, that was so powerful to think about blockadia in that way. But what also, to the point about collusion, Sigrid, and that Bill was talking about earlier, I mean, we also saw very, very powerfully communicated was the repressive power of the state and its corporate bedfellows. And so trying to neutralize these social movements, trying to arrest people, intimidate people, jail people, imprison people, and of course, importantly, send a message of you're next to anybody else out there who might be a potential activist. And so I thought that was fascinating. But at the end, you know, it goes back to, you know, my parents were activists in the civil rights movement, and many folks in that era, you know, when asked, how did you know you were going to win, right? And I said, we didn't, but we knew that the struggle was morally correct, that we had to struggle no matter what. It was in our DNA. If you are facing injustice, you have to take a stand. And that's what I saw here. So against all odds, you all took that moral stand. And to me, that's the most important question, not whether we win or not, but whether we are on the right side of history.
So the winning feels better. I hear you on that one. Michael.
Yeah, I wanted to chime in about winning. Sometimes it's a matter of how you define the win. And I would really like to emphasize to people that it's very often how you look at it. You know, sometimes the win is that we got a whole lot more people to know about this than ever knew before. And we can see that. And sometimes the win is what, hey, we got the city council or the county environment, the county commissioners to change their mind. You know, it could be either.
Yeah, absolutely.
To that end, you know, the film came out after 6 years, and it's very important when a film comes out that you spend as much time and energy promoting it so that people can learn about it and can watch it and hopefully can get motivated, in this case, to get in the streets and make their voices heard. But speaking about corporate power and whatnot, all these streaming services came into being in the last like 3 years or so. And so as a documentary filmmaker, I'm saying, wow, that's great. There's so many more outlets. Well, all of them over the last year or so have decided that they don't really want to carry documentaries. Amazon, the biggest, went so far as saying they were not going to handle documentaries at all. And the other ones are totally cutting back. And, you know, so they're doing all these, you know, silly reality shows, and they're doing fiction that is, you know, whatever will grab people's attention. But these documentaries that, you know, have important messages are kind of left to their own devices to find their audience. So that's just another example.
That's a really that's a challenge I wasn't aware of. Thank you, Joe.
That's really sad.
It is. It's scary, in fact.
Yeah.
The people who, you know, own all the news medias, the people who own the streaming media, there are all these corporate entities that aren't even entertainment companies. HBO is owned by AT&T, and you know, Abby, I talked to Abby 2 days ago, and she did this big protest at a bank, and they shut down a bank, and then she pointed out that the national headquarters was also shut down. But she said there was no coverage in any of the news for either of those, not the local news or the national news. So, you know, it's like what we're up against. You know, Alyssa said earlier in backstage, we have to get, you know, tons of people into the street, because we have to make it clear that, you know, we're not going to, you know, stand for this.
Yeah, so that's even another layer to that kind of collusion that Bill was speaking to earlier, right? Which includes the collusion of the media.
Yeah.
And sorry, Bill, go ahead.
Well, just to try to crossfade the ideas of the winning and the challenges of the institutions that we're up against. You know, people talk about decolonizing and decolonization, and I'd like to just offer a slight, you know, different one way of utilizing that, and think about what it is for us to decolonize our time and our imaginations, and thinking about how important it is if we could take the time that we sit on the couch doing this, or the times that we do things that really aren't that meaningful to us in our life, and be able to spend time in community or working in a land trust farm. That's a win, right? When we start delivering food to people, good quality food to people, when we organize a local credit union, and or we do a time bank, or we, you know, I mean, I think there are just many ways that we can take the tentacles of capitalism and extractive culture and pull them out of our own time and lives, and in community with others do other things. And then in that, build the relationships, those really truly resilient relationships, become our source of power for when you show up at the county council meeting, or those conversations in the spinach row could just as well be about organizing for the next banner action. So it's like, the other piece that I like to think about is that there are lots of ways of being a change agent, And whether those are people who are doing those sorts of things, the farmers, the whatever, or the people who are telling stories like Joe, or activists or campaigners or community organizers who are not asking for anybody to do anything, but they're either building power in communities and conversations in communities to meet cultural work. All of those things, we become a bigger movement if we start celebrating the various ways that people are already doing the work, and then build conviviality, solidarity, connections, relationships with people across those places and celebrate them. It gets us a bigger movement. It gives us a different way of talking about winning, and it keeps us grounded in the power building from the power we have to the power we need, which is really key for organizing.
Mm-hmm. Woo, woo. Yeah, right on. So yeah, so much in all of that statement right there. Thank you. And a parallel theme, I guess, is that when folks approach me and say, well, you know, on climate, it feels like too global of an issue. I don't, you know, we need the national government to take, we need to sign them, you know, we need to sign a treaty, and I'm not disagreeing with those things, but I would also argue that the vast majority of the actions that you would see in a climate treaty or in a national agreement have to happen at the regional, local, or even neighborhood level. And so, and they dovetail with some of the examples that you just gave here. So and to use this kind of overused phrase, but that's what really builds community resilience.
Right, and that's the way that we shift culture, because the far right knows that you shift culture and then policy follows. Well, we have to shift and transform culture for the policies to follow, and we have to be building that paradigm, you know, decolonizing one, pulling from one, and feeding the other in order to build be part of a global movement that's community based.
Yeah. So, Alyssa, how is this resonating with you? Because actually, you gave an example earlier of a policy win before you were born that motivated you, and it served as an example for you to kind of get out in the street.
Yeah, so in the film, there's a story about Richard Nixon being pushed by the sheer volume and power of people in the streets to pass progressive environmental policy, despite being a Republican president. And I think that really speaks to the power that people have, even though there are significant political and legal and social barriers that are seeking to prevent people from taking action. We still have an incredible amount of power if we just have the courage and the commitment and the encouragement in the community to protest and fight for our rights and our communities and our lives. So I think that really inspires me and should really inspire everyone, particularly young people, to like be cognizant of the power that we hold. I know it seems like really frustrating and oppressing to like constantly be met with the force, like the legal force or the political forces that stand in our way. And especially when our actions don't have like an obvious win. But we do have that power. So it's important to recognize the previous wins in the past and then use this as precedents to continue to push forward and continue to take to the streets or the oceans or the railroads, and really recognize that we have more power than we may consider.
Such a rich conversation. We'll have a little more dialogue here. I see some questions coming up in the chat. Michael,
Alyssa, I wanted to mention that what you said just now reminds me of how they did the civil rights movement. Yeah, they couldn't see each change happen, but it combined and it made it happen. So you're absolutely right. That's how it works. We've seen it already.
Yeah, and just a side note there, I've been in a kind of an interesting deep dive in the civil rights movement over the last year or so, and watching a lot of documentaries, Joe, as well as dramatizations of this, and that the power of storytelling, it's super important. And it and you can almost kind of go back and by doing this, and it wasn't intentional on my part, I just kind of slid into it, but you can almost go back and start to sync out how everything started to come together, and how is that applicable to the moment that we're in now. So for anyone that's looking for a Netflix binge of some kind, yeah, I would recommend that. David, any thoughts that are coming up for you in this conversation?
Oh goodness, so much. You know, I think one of the things that is super impressive, of course, and of course, you know, I don't want to just sort of stereotype and be like, oh, Alyssa, you should talk about the youth, but of course, you know, you are a youth activist and leader. But I mean, that came through so brilliantly in the film, the youth activism. And I guess, you know, I guess I'll just say I was so impressed with the youth, particularly, you know, Aji. Yeah. In many ways, because there's this epidemic of depression and anxiety that has really gripped so many of the young generation. And I've often said that much of that is probably, you know, stemming from climate grief, and it certainly is. And he's, you know, and then Joe, you, and of course Aji sort of put that on, you know, front and center, like really talked about that. And I just thought that was so powerful in the film. But I was also, you know, drawn to the multi-generational aspect of the resistance. So you had Aji, you had the youth out there, but you also had the elderly folks out there. My God, the woman, I forget her name, 71 years old, walking like, yes, like 1,000 something miles. I was hurting my knees just looking at her. It was unbelievable, that indomitable spirit. And so, you know, I guess I would just say that this multi-generational, multi-scalar, sort of multi-issue activism is something that is truly inspiring. And it goes beyond that single focus, that single issue kind of activism that some people think is going to save the world or whatever their cause is. And you just beautifully show how intersectional this stuff has to be and how it's connected to so many communities. So I appreciated that.
I do have two kids who are 22 and 29. And, you know, what Aji said so eloquently about how climate anxiety is, you know, keeping him from sleeping, making him depressed. I mean, I think all of us know that within 50 years, you know, this is going to be a very different world. And that's a hard thing to wrap your mind around. But especially when you're 20 years old or 20 something years old, and you think about that, I mean, you know, it's enough to keep anyone up at night. But if you're just trying to organize your life and thinking about your future, I think it's even more difficult.
Yeah, and so for those who haven't seen the film yet, Aji is one of the young men and women, young folks who are involved with our Children's Trust lawsuits. So, okay, well, we're coming up, starting to round the bend here. I feel like we could spend hours together, and maybe someday outside of the pandemic, we can do that over food. Any last thoughts from anyone? And then I'm going to ask Michael in a moment. I'll ask you to tee us up for the upcoming events. But before we do, just on the conversation, any last thoughts?
I'd like to mention something that Bill said that struck a chord with me about how we're impacting our kids. And I saw it happen with my kids. Little things that you might not think of, but every now and then they'll say something about how impressed they are with something that I did. And it's usually after they commented on how stupid it was. And my son said, why is there a women's march? That's not right, that's sexist. And then a couple of years later, he was saying he was going to come. So, and I'm at the polls every year, working as a poll worker at the elections. That same kid called me and said, and when he didn't realize I was there. He happened to catch me, and I told him where he was. And he said, you know, Mom, I am so proud that you do that. I was shocked. So but it just happened to catch him at the right moment that he said it. So, you know, we might not realize how we're impacting our kids.
I guess my last comment would be what Miriam, the 72-year-old woman who walked across the country, says. She says, taking action is the antidote for despair. And I really think that, you know, you can't help but feel like this is difficult to wrap your mind around when you think about, you know, trying to get all the nations in the world to cooperate to make a lasting change on climate change. But, you know, taking action is the antidote. And, you know, I remember the anti-war movement. I was on the edge of that. And it was not only the antidote for despair, it was actually exciting. It was energizing. There was great clothes. There was great music. You know, getting together with like-minded people to make change is invigorating. So, you know, that's a positive.
I remember that.
Right. Joe, that's a great way to bring us to a close. Taking action is the antidote to despair, and taking action will mean something different for each one of us. I do think the film calls on us to really dig deep and explore, moving past our comfort zone and making personal sacrifice. What does that mean to each of us? I asked that question of my staff earlier in the week. I got some wiggliness on the word sacrifice. I just wanted to remind folks that does mean to protect the sacred, whatever that means to you, to protect the sacred. And so I too have been really inspired both by the film, Joe, thank you for making it. Thanks to my team for pulling together this discussion. Thanks to the panelists for coming together to have that discussion. I've been inspired again by the intergenerational conversation here. Alyssa, thank you. Along that same vein, both my dad and my aunt who live outside of the area have joined the webinar tonight. So I get to really span the bridge here on intergenerational. We have some opportunities for action coming up in our community. Michael, if you would speak to those.
Okay, so this is the one that's tomorrow. We are rallying at the County Administration Building in Santa Barbara, which, if you don't know, is across the street from the Santa Barbara Courthouse. And it's done by the Society of Fearless Grandmothers of Santa Barbara, as well as 350 Santa Barbara, UCSB Environmental Affairs Board, Sunrise, any number of people. But the point of this is to bring awareness to more people that we have an issue here and that we can do something. Specifically, we can do something major right here in our backyard, because Exxon is trying to start up oil extraction again. And since the pipeline hasn't been repaired, what they're trying to do is truck it. And I don't know about anybody else, but this has me terrified. Aside from the actual environmental impacts of all those trucks, aside from that, there's the fact that these trucks are moving bombs. And if a bomb goes off and happens to coincide with a fire, we could end up with not being able to get out, because we only have one road here. That's the joy of living in Santa Barbara. So it's beyond me how the staff of the Planning Commission could even consider that this might be safe. I don't understand that, but they are apparently planning to say it's safe, and we want to make sure that that doesn't happen. So we're having this rally, but then after the rally, next week, there is the Planning Commission meeting, and we're encouraging everybody, please, to make comments, submit them by email, submit them virtually in person, whichever you want to do. So that's what's coming up with this, the Fearless Grandmothers. And then after that, I'm sure that I hope most of you know about, this is nationwide. There is going to, on October 2nd, there's almost 600 rallies and marches being planned across the country. This is for reproductive rights. It's in response to the Texas law. And if you haven't heard about the Texas law, you might want to look into it. It is terrifying, and not actually just because of the attack on women's rights, which is actually an attack on more than just women. This impacts a lot more. But the bill itself actually authorizes vigilantism, which I thought was against the law. But apparently it's not, because the Supreme Court decided not to weigh in on this. They just let it happen and not stop it. But now there is another bill, another case coming before the court that they have said that they will hear. So we need to make a whole lot of noise. And every march that people attend across the country will send a significant message. And we know that. We know that the Supreme Court does pay attention to what the country says, to public opinion. And I'd like to just summarize that it's important to, I think it's important to know when you take an action, who you're trying to reach. And this one, we know we're trying to reach the Supreme Court. Tomorrow's action, we know we have a significant ability to reach the County Planning Commission. They're already worried about how many comments they're going to have. So we want to make sure that that is a reality.
Thank you, Michael. That's some great opportunities for folks who are ready to step up and get involved. Thank you for your leadership, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you to all the panelists, to tonight's sponsors, to the League of Women Voters, Vijaya, thank you so much. If you have not yet watched the film, our link is active until September 30th, and the link is in the chat there. So you've got about a week to watch that film. And you can look for an email in the next few days with a recording of this webinar and other resources from us. The Community Environmental Council's next webinar is September 28th at 7 p.m. and the focus is on electric vehicles, and it's part of our National Drive Electric Week activities. So if you're looking to get into an electric vehicle, this is a 101 on how to do that. So thank you so much, everyone. Really appreciate the great conversation and your time. And I look forward to seeing you all again soon.
Thank you
so much, Sigrid. Appreciate
Thank you,
it.
everybody.
Everybody.
Thank you.
Good words.
Yeah.
Please stay in touch. I'm going to put my email in the chat in case anybody wants to stay connected.
I do. Bill, thank you so much. Joe, thank you.
Thank you.
Alyssa, David.
Good luck. Let us know if we
Michael,
can
thank
help
you.
out in any way.
Thank
Alyssa.
you.
Thank you,
We
Alyssa.
do light projection and giant banners. We love to come down and do a quick how to workshop and and play around, have some fun. If you're into that sort of thing.
We would love that. Yes, I'll email you.
Oh man, invite me, please. Thank you.
Yeah, really.